Okay, today we're going to talk about one-parent reproduction in animals. Now, we already studied a little bit about this in a way. When we were studying the plant kingdom, we talked about how you could take a cutting from a plant and you could take that cutting, and sometimes the stem would have these little nubs on it, and if you put that in water, we could trick the stem into not growing a leaf, but to grow a root. And then we could put it in the dirt and we would get a whole new plant out of it, like we did in class. And we also said that you didn't have to use it in water. We did it in water so we could see the roots develop. But you could also take a cutting of a plant and you could stick it in the dirt and the same thing would happen. Okay? That's one parent. You took the plant and you made a whole new plant out of that one plant. And it is genetically identical to the first one. Every single solitary cell in the plant is a duplicate of its parents. Its parent. Okay? Well, same kind of thing will happen with animals. There is something called budding, budding. You watched in the video earlier that I showed you about a, what plant was it? An anemone that would grow a structure, and that's how budding happens. If you look in your textbook on page 115, you can see a hydra. That's what it was. It wasn't an anemone. It was a hydra. And the hydra looked like it was a living organism, like it was an animal, but it kind of looked like it was a plant in a way, but it wasn't. And it was the thing with the spiny tentacles that kind of floated around in the water and had the stingy cells and stuff. Well, what'll happen is on the stalk part, the stem part, it'll get a little bump. And the bump will get bigger and it'll get bigger and it'll bigger, and then it'll start to spring out some of those tentacle-like structures that come out, and eventually it'll get big enough that it can and develop all the parts that it needs to eat and things like that, and it will eventually detach from the parent and be a whole new plant that stands on its own. That's budding. It starts with getting a little bump, a bud, a bump. And the bump gets bigger and bigger and develops, and once it can survive on its own, it detaches from the parent and lives its life separate from the parent. It is genetically identical to the original plant. Not one single cell is different in the new plant from the original, from the original hydra. It's exactly the same. Hydras are very, very tiny and you need a microscope to see them, okay? Sea stars. Sea stars will also reproduce sometimes, not all of them, from a single parent. And what happens is some of the sea stars that you saw in the video will actually like break in half. And what happens is it starts to pull apart, and in the example from the video that we saw, it was a 6-ray star. And when it broke apart, it had 3 rays in one piece and 3 rays in the other piece. And then the parts that were once attached will grow new rays. And we saw some examples in the videos of different sea stars that were at different points in their regeneration. We call that regeneration because in a starfish, if say, a boat, let's say, clipped one of the rays off, it will grow a new ray in its place. And sometimes if you're at the beach and you see a sea star, you'll see that, it's got 4 or 5 nice long rays, and then all of a sudden it's got one stubby one. That's because it's in the middle of regeneration. But there are some sea stars that will make a whole new starfish, not just with a ray, but a whole new starfish out of one. And what happens is it kind of breaks apart in the middle, like I just described. and then the two pieces that used to be attached will grow replacement rays. And that second sea star is identical genetically to the first sea star. Every single cell is exactly the same as it was in its parent. Okay? Those are two examples of reproduction, making more of its own kind with only one parent. The thing that you need to learn from that is if there's only one parent, that means the offspring is identical to the parent. Okay? I think the third video I gave you was of the anemone, and that was the one that had, all the structures that were going like this. And in that fish tank that was in that video, he happened to catch when it was pulling itself apart and stretching. And what it did was it pulled itself apart and separated until it was just like a thread connecting the two, and eventually pulling, and it separated completely. And one anemone was in one place in the tank, and the other one was in a second place. And he had all the steps in between. Okay, so those are three different examples of one parent reproduction in animals, where the offspring is identical in every way, except size sometimes in the beginning. But every cell is, and genetically, it's exactly the same as its parent.